He brought his new girlfriend to my mother's retirement party. She was wearing the bracelet he said he'd lost. That detail, the bracelet, is the one that stayed with Nora Ellison longest afterward. Not the girlfriend's smile, which was wide and practiced, and aimed at everyone in the room except Nora. Not the way Griffin walked through the door of the Meridian Club, with his hand on the small of the woman's back, easy and proprietary, as though he were arriving somewhere he belonged, rather than walking into a celebration for the woman whose daughter he had spent 5 years systematically deceiving. The bracelet, thin gold chain, single pavé diamond clasp. He had told Nora he left it in a hotel room in Phoenix during a work trip. He had told her the hotel sent it back missing. He had said it with the kind of weary frustration that makes a lie sound like an inconvenience, and she had believed him because she had been believing him for 5 years. And the architecture of belief, once constructed, is difficult to dismantle from the inside. The bracelet sat on the wrist of a woman named Tessa, who was 31 and who worked at Griffin's firm, and who looked at the room with the confidence of someone who had been told, in some private context she and Griffin shared, that Nora would not be a problem. Tessa was wrong about that. So was Griffin. What neither of them knew, what no one in that ballroom knew except Nora's mother and one attorney named Douglas Wainwright, who was seated near the back and nursing a glass of water with the stillness of a man accustomed to waiting, was that 3 weeks earlier, Margaret Ellison had signed the final documents restructuring a family trust worth approximately $220 million. The trust had existed for 40 years. Its beneficiary, sole and unconditional, was Nora, and Griffin Pell, who had spent the last 18 months positioning himself for what he privately believed would be a very favorable divorce settlement, had not been told any of this because no one had ever told him, because no one in the Ellison family had ever considered it his business to know. He was about to find out why. Nora had grown up understanding that money was a private thing. Her father, Edmund Ellison, built the family's holdings over 3 decades in private infrastructure development. Roads, water systems, logistics networks, and markets. Nobody glamorous was looking at yet. He operated through holding companies with names that meant nothing to anyone outside a small circle of attorneys and accountants. His name appeared on no Forbes list, no charity gala program, no business profile in any magazine. He had been offered coverage twice and declined twice, both times with the same explanation. The moment you let the public measure you, you hand them the tool to misunderstand you. Edmund died when Nora was 26. The trust passed to Margaret in full trust management, with Nora as sole distributional beneficiary. Margaret continued Edmund's philosophy without interruption. She drove a 10-year-old Volvo. She lived in the same house in Charlottesville she had lived in for 32 years. She gave to 3 causes and told no one which ones. She had a standing appointment at a moderately priced hair salon every 6 weeks and tipped 20% and knew the stylist's daughter's name. Nora had absorbed all of it. She had moved to Washington at 24, taken a research position at a policy nonprofit that paid $48,000 a year, and built a life that looked, to anyone observing it, like the life of a competent and self-sufficient woman of modest means. She rented an apartment in Cleveland Park. She took the metro. She bought groceries at the regular grocery store and clothes from places that had sales racks and a sensible coat she'd owned for 7 years that still worked fine. She had her father's eyes, precise and watchful, and her mother's capacity for stillness. She did not talk about herself in ways that invited further questions. She was, to most people who met her, pleasant and reserved and slightly difficult to read. Griffin Pell had found this intriguing for about 1.5 years. After that, he found it inconvenient. They met at a mutual friend's dinner party in Georgetown. Griffin was 36, a senior associate at a white-shoe law firm, the kind of tall and certain that read immediately as successful in rooms full of people who equated confidence with competence. He had strong opinions about wine and restaurants and the best route across town at different times of day. He filled a room in the way of someone who had practiced filling rooms and was pleased with the results. Nora watched him from across the table the way she watched everyone, registering, cataloging, making no conclusions yet. He asked for her number. She gave it to him. He called the next day. She noted this, because men who call the next day are either genuinely interested or running a specific play, and the difference matters. The first 6 months were good. Not extraordinary, but good. He was engaged and attentive, and made her laugh with a frequency that felt, at the time, like evidence of compatibility rather than performance. He asked about her work with what seemed like genuine curiosity. He was good with her mother on the 2 occasions they met. He remembered small things. The name of a colleague she'd mentioned in passing, a restaurant she'd said she wanted to try, the anniversary of her father's death. She had been careful all her adult life about letting people in. Griffin's attentiveness made her less careful. She understood later that this was the point. They moved in together at the 2-year mark. Nora paid the security deposit and the first month's rent without mentioning it, because she paid for things without mentioning it. This was simply how she operated. Griffin contributed to rent thereafter, with the consistency of someone who was aware of appearances. He bought dinner on evenings when he thought of it, and let her pay on evenings when he did not. He was not calculating about this exactly. He simply existed inside a framework where her contributions were invisible to him, because invisible contributions are the easiest kind to take for granted. Her mother noticed the first time she stayed with them in the apartment. Margaret said nothing. She made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and looked at the way Griffin moved through the space, at home in it, in the way of someone who has not thought carefully about whether the space belongs to him. And she said nothing. The silence was the assessment. Nora understood it. They got engaged on a Tuesday in April. Griffin proposed at a restaurant Nora had actually recommended to him 6 months earlier, which she found interesting in a way she could not fully articulate. They were married in September in a small ceremony that Nora planned entirely. Griffin's contributions were enthusiasm and a seating chart suggestion that Nora revised without comment. For 4 years, the marriage ran on Nora's infrastructure. She managed the finances, the household, the social calendar, the maintenance appointments, the insurance renewals, the gifts for his parents at Christmas and birthdays. She did her work. She visited her mother every 3 weeks. She did not raise her voice. She did not make demands. She did not, in the language of people who later heard their story, give him any sign. She was not giving him signs. She was paying attention. The first indication arrived on a Sunday morning in March. Nora was going through their joint credit card statement, a monthly task she performed with the same thoroughness she applied to everything, and she found a charge she did not recognize. A hotel in Crystal City, one night, $260, dated on a Wednesday, when Griffin had told her he was at a client dinner that ran late, and he'd just stayed at the office. She held the statement for a moment. She set it down. She made coffee. She drank it standing at the window. She looked out at the street. She did not confront Griffin. She was her father's daughter, and her father had never made a decision without evidence, and one credit card charge was a data point, not a conclusion. Over the following 8 weeks, she gathered the rest. There were 4 more hotel charges, 3 restaurant bills for 2 on evenings she had been told were client events or work functions, a florist charge that was not for anything she had received, a notation in Griffin's phone calendar, visible briefly when he handed it to her to find an address, that read simply TK. Fry 7 p.m. with a location she recognized as a wine bar 3 neighborhoods away. TK, Tessa Kuhn, Senior Associate. Griffin had mentioned her exactly once, in passing, in a context designed to make her seem professional and forgettable. Nora looked up Tessa Kuhn on LinkedIn. 31 JD from Georgetown. The profile photo was professional and carefully lit, and conveyed the kind of deliberate attractiveness that functions as its own category of ambition. Nora closed the tab. She continued gathering. She called Douglas Wainwright on a Thursday evening from her car, parked 2 blocks from the apartment. Douglas had been the Ellison family's lead attorney for 19 years. He had known Nora since she was a graduate student. When she told him she needed to talk about the trust and the timing and what options existed for protective restructuring, he said, "Tell me what you know." She told him. He was quiet for 4 seconds. "Your father designed the trust specifically for situations like this," he said. "The question is sequencing. We move now before anything is filed, and we move quietly." "Oh, how long?" 3 weeks if we prioritize. 4 at the outside. "Prioritize," she said. She drove home. She made dinner. She asked Griffin about his day. She listened to his answer and responded at the appropriate moments and gave nothing away, because she had been giving nothing away for most of her life, and she was very good at it. The restructuring happened in the background of ordinary life. Margaret Ellison, who had spent 4 decades watching her husband conduct business in the register of controlled patients, executed the final documents 3 weeks later in Douglas's office on a Tuesday afternoon. She was 71 years old. Her handwriting was clear and steady. She signed where indicated without ceremony. "And Griffin has no claim to any of this," she said when the last page was done. It was not quite a question. Nuh, Douglas said. The trust predates the marriage by 40 years. The assets have never been commingled with marital funds. Under Virginia law, what's held in trust is not marital property. He cannot touch it. Margaret looked at the documents. She looked at Douglas. He doesn't know it exists. No good. She picked up her coffee. Then we wait for him to make his move. 3 days after the documents were signed, Nora came home from work to find Griffin standing in the kitchen with his phone face down on the counter, which he did when he had been on a call he did not want to discuss. She noted this. She asked about his day. She made dinner. He moved through the following weeks with the slightly elevated energy of a man who has made a private decision and is pleased with himself for making it. He was solicitous in small, performative ways. Flowers once, a suggestion about a weekend trip, a compliment about her work that had the texture of something offered to offset guilt. She received each of these with the warmth of a woman who noticed nothing. Because the most useful thing about invisibility was that it ran both directions. He contacted a divorce attorney in early April. Douglas's monitoring flagged it within 48 hours. The attorney specialized in high-asset marital dissolution. Griffin had represented, in the intake paperwork, that his wife was a nonprofit researcher earning $52,000 a year. He had estimated household assets at $340,000. The joint savings account, his 401, Inc., and an estimate of the apartment's market value, which he appeared to believe was marital property. He was wrong about the apartment, too. The lease was in Nora's name. She had paid the security deposit. His contribution to rent had never established ownership. His attorney would eventually explain this to him, but not before Griffin had already organized his expectations around a version of reality that did not correspond to the facts. In late April, he transferred $47,000 from their joint savings to a personal brokerage he had opened the previous week. He did this without telling Nora. He did this on a Wednesday, from his phone, in the time between when she left for work and when she would ordinarily check the account. Douglas sent her an encrypted notification at 10:43 in the morning. Nora was in a meeting. She excused herself, read the notification in the hallway, and stood for a moment with her hand on the wall. $47,000. The amount he believed he was quietly securing as his opening position. She thought about her father, who had taught her that the way a person behaves when they think no one is watching is the most accurate information you will ever have about them. She went back into the meeting. Her mother's retirement party was Margaret's own idea. She had run the Ellison Family Foundation for 9 years after Edmund died, and she had decided at 71 that she wanted to hand the operational reins to Nora and stop running things. She wanted to mark the transition. She wanted to do it at the Meridian Club, which she had always liked, in a room full of people she had chosen. And she wanted flowers and good wine and a cake from the Portuguese bakery she'd patronized for 20 years. Nora organized everything, as she organized everything. Griffin RSVP'd yes and arrived with Tessa Kuhn. Nora was standing near the bar, speaking with her mother's oldest friend, when the door opened. She did not see them come in. She sensed the shift in the room, conversations fractionally pausing, attention redirecting, the particular quality of collective surprise that moves through a crowd when something unexpected enters a space where everyone knows the context. She turned. Griffin was wearing his navy suit. Tessa Kuhn was wearing a green dress that was appropriate for a cocktail party and entirely wrong for this particular occasion, which suggested she either did not know where she was or had decided it did not matter. Her hand was in Griffin's. The gold bracelet caught the light. Nora looked at it for exactly 1 second. Then she turned back to Margaret's friend and finished the conversation she had been having. Griffin found her 20 minutes later. He had released Tessa's hand by then. He was performing concern, an expression she recognized because she had watched him construct it on other occasions. Eyebrows slightly drawn. Voice calibrated to suggest he was the one carrying the weight of an uncomfortable situation. Nora, I should have. He stopped. Tried again. I'm sorry about the circumstances. She looked at him. Thank you for coming, Griffin. We need to talk. I know. Douglas Wainwright will be in touch with your attorney on Monday. Something moved behind his eyes. You have an attorney. I have had an attorney for some time. He stood with that for a moment. Your mother knows. About Tessa. My mother knows most things. She smiled at him, politely. The way you smile at someone you are done with. Enjoy the evening. She walked back toward her mother, who was standing near the window with Douglas and a small cluster of Foundation colleagues, and she did not look back. Griffin Pell served his divorce petition the following Monday. He was in good spirits that morning, according to his attorney. He believed he was in a strong position. He had a document specialist who had identified what appeared to be a jointly held savings account, a marital apartment, and a gap in Nora's income that he intended to argue reflected hidden assets she had not disclosed. He arrived at the conference room of Wainwright and Associates at 9 a.m. on a Thursday in May. He was accompanied by his attorney, a man named Roger Thatch, who specialized in high asset dissolution and had told Griffin, across 2 preparatory meetings, that the proceedings would likely resolve in 6 to 8 weeks. Roger had not yet reviewed the Ellison trust documents. He had not yet understood that the woman he was preparing to negotiate against was the sole beneficiary of a $220 million trust established 40 years before the marriage. He had not yet understood that his client had spent the previous month committing documented financial misconduct against a woman whose legal team had been monitoring his every financial move since April. Roger Thatch was going to have a very instructive morning. Nora came in at 9:15. Black blazer, white blouse, hair back. No jewelry, except a simple watch her father had given her on her 21st birthday. She sat across from Griffin and folded her hands on the table and looked at him with the expression of a woman who has completed a very long project and is prepared to close the file. Douglas opened the folder. The family home in Charlottesville, not marital property, held in the Ellison Family Trust since 1984. Not relevant to these proceedings. The apartment on Newark Street, leased solely in Mrs. Pell's name. Mr. Pell's rent contributions did not establish ownership under Virginia law. Not marital property. The joint savings account. Mr. Pell transferred $47,000 from this account to a personal brokerage on April 23rd without spousal knowledge or consent. This transfer occurred after Mr. Pell had already engaged divorce counsel, establishing documented intent. Under Virginia law, this constitutes dissipation of marital assets. We have the transfer record, the timeline, and the intake paperwork from his consultation. Roger Thatch set down his pen. Douglas turned a page. The Ellison Family Trust. He looked at Griffin. Mr. Pell appears to believe that his wife has modest personal assets and a nonprofit salary. He appears to anticipate that any inheritance from the Ellison estate would be subject to equitable distribution. I need to correct both assumptions. He placed a document on the table. A single page. A summary. The Ellison Family Trust, established 1984, currently holds assets valued at approximately $220 million. These include commercial real estate across 4 states, a private equity portfolio, and controlling interests in 2 operating companies. The trust predates the marriage by 26 years. Its assets have never been commingled with marital funds. Under Virginia law, trust assets are not subject to equitable distribution in divorce proceedings. Mr. Pell has no claim to any portion of this estate. The room was very quiet. Griffin stared at the document. His face underwent a sequence of recalibrations. Disbelief, calculation, disbelief again, before settling into something that looked, finally, like the first honest expression he'd worn in 5 years. 220, he said. He stopped. He started again. You have 200 and... He could not finish the sentence. Nora looked at him. She did not speak. She had spent 5 years being spoken over in rooms like this one, her silence mistaken for the absence of anything worth hearing. She was done correcting the record in real time. The documents on the table were doing that for her. Douglas continued. Given the documented dissipation of assets, the altered beneficiary designations on 2 insurance policies, he slid 2 additional pages across the table, and the undisclosed legal consultations, Mrs. Pell's legal team will be filing a counterclaim for full recovery of dissipated assets, plus applicable damages. Mr. Pell's current exposure exceeds $90,000 and may increase depending on discovery. Roger Thatch gathered his papers with the controlled movements of a man who has just been informed that the floor is not where he believed it to be. He turned to Griffin. We need to step out. Griffin did not move immediately. He was looking at Nora. His eyes were moving across her face in the manner of someone searching for a version of a person that is no longer there. The version that had been quiet and manageable and available. The version he had categorized as predictable and processed accordingly. He had never actually seen her. He had seen the version of her she permitted him to see, and he had mistaken that permission for the complete picture. You knew, he said. The whole time. Nora looked at him for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was the same voice she had always had, level, clear, without performance. I knew about Tessa in February. I knew about the hotel in Crystal City in March. I knew about the attorney you contacted in April. I knew about the $47,000 at 10:43 on a Wednesday morning. She paused. My mother knew about Tessa before I did. My attorney has been tracking your financial decisions since the week you made the first one. She stood. She picked up her bag. You came to my mother's retirement party with your girlfriend. Griffin, you walked in wearing the bracelet you told me you lost. She looked at him steadily. You thought you were watching me have no options. You were watching me run out of reasons to wait. She walked to the door. At the threshold, she paused, not turning around. The apartment will be relocked by Friday. Your belongings will be boxed and available for pickup. The joint accounts are frozen pending the dissipation claim resolution. A beat. Douglas will handle everything from here. The door closed behind her without drama. Griffin Pell's life restructured itself over the following months, with the quiet efficiency of a system returning to equilibrium after a foreign element is removed. He was placed on administrative leave at the firm within 3 weeks, following a compliance disclosure triggered by the divorce filing that surfaced the dissipation claim. His managing partner called it a difficult situation. The leave became a separation before the end of summer. Tessa Kuhn, who had been drawn to Griffin's version of himself, the confident partner-track attorney, the nice apartment, the effortless social authority, found that version difficult to locate once its supporting infrastructure was gone. She was 31. She was building her own career. The man sitting in her living room at 2 in the afternoon refreshing financial news, with the expression of someone who had misjudged something fundamental, was not the man she had signed up for. She told him as much, kindly but clearly, in early July. His personal brokerage was placed under a temporary restraining order pending the dissipation claim. The $47,000 he had moved remained frozen. His credit cards, applied to the lifestyle he had been maintaining, began to show their limits without Nora's invisible contributions buffering the edges. By October, he had settled. He received a fraction of what he had entered that conference room expecting. His attorney described the outcome as the best available given the circumstances. Griffin did not contest it. He did not have the standing or the energy. Nora Ellison. She had gone back to her full name before the ink was dry, stepped formally into the Ellison Foundation directorship in January. She expanded its mission. The foundation had focused on rural infrastructure access. She broadened it to include workforce development and educational programming for women transitioning out of financially dependent relationships. She funded the expansion from the trust. She built a small, skilled team. She operated with the same quiet precision she had applied to every kitchen table and joint bank account, and overlooked responsibility for the previous 5 years. Except now the scale matched the capacity she had always had. In March, the Washington Post ran a profile. The headline read, "The Ellison Here, who ran a nonprofit to stay grounded." The piece described her years of deliberate anonymity, her father's philosophy about visible wealth, her decision to work within her means while the trust waited. A photograph from the foundation's winter gala. Nora at the podium, composed and certain in a way she had never been permitted to be publicly, ran above the fold in the style section. Griffin saw it on his phone while waiting for a job interview at a firm substantially smaller than the one that had let him go. He looked at the photograph for a long moment. He looked at her face, which carried an expression he did not recognize from 5 years of marriage. Not the carefully modulated neutrality she had maintained in his company, but something unguarded and complete. The face of a woman who no longer needed to manage what she revealed. He put the phone away. He straightened his jacket. He went in for the interview. On a Saturday morning in June, Nora sat on the back porch of her mother's house in Charlottesville. Margaret was inside making eggs. The morning was warm and unhurried. The garden Edmund had designed 30 years ago had been tended and untended, and tended again across the decades. And it looked now the way old gardens look. Not manicured, but established. Rooted in something that did not require constant attention because the roots had gone deep enough to hold. Nora had a cup of coffee. Her father's watch was on her wrist. She thought about the file she had maintained for 14 months. The credit card charges, the hotel timestamps, the transfer records, the attorney consultations she was not supposed to know about, the meticulous accumulation of what a person reveals when they believe they are unobserved. She had not opened the file in weeks. She opened it now. She scrolled through it once, slowly. Every document was exactly where she had placed it. The record was complete and precise, and it had done exactly what it was built to do. She closed it. She selected it. She deleted it. The confirmation prompt asked if she was sure. She was sure. The file was gone. She did not delete it because she had forgiven Griffin. Forgiveness was a separate transaction and would proceed on its own timeline. She deleted it because the file had been a tool and the work was done. And carrying tools you no longer need is just weight with a different name. Margaret came out with 2 plates and set one in front of her, and sat down across from her, and they ate together in the easy quiet of people who do not need to fill silence to feel connected. After a while, Margaret said, "Your father would have been pleased." Nora looked at the garden, at the roses, which were early this year, at the birch tree at the far end that he had planted the spring she was born, and that was now 4 times the height it had been in the photographs. "He would have been pleased that it worked," she said. "Or that I didn't wait for someone to rescue me." "Both," her mother said. "Definitely both." Nora picked up her coffee. She looked at the watch on her wrist. The second hand moved with its small, consistent certainty, indifferent to everything except the next second and the next one after that. She had spent 5 years making herself smaller than she was, so that a man who was smaller than he appeared could feel sufficient. She had managed and arranged and smoothed and absorbed and produced the invisible labor that makes a life look effortless to the person benefiting from it. And she had done this without complaint and without credit and without anyone in Griffin Pell's world understanding that the system he moved through was a system someone was running. And then she had stopped running it, and the system had revealed itself for what it was, a structure that had nothing of his inside it, not the apartment, not the money, not the reputation, not even the confidence, which had borrowed its certainty from the stability she'd built around him and had not noticed when she withdrew it. She had not been passive. She had been patient, which is a different thing entirely. She had not been invisible. She had been watching, which looks like invisibility to the people not worth showing yourself to. She had not been without power. She had been selective about where she aimed it, which is the only thing that separates power from noise. The morning moved into mid-morning. Margaret took the plates inside. A neighbor's dog moved along the fence line. A bird she couldn't identify called once from the birch tree and then was quiet. Nora sat in the chair that had been her father's, in the garden he had planted, in the house where she had learned every lesson that had mattered, and she felt the particular and irreplaceable sensation of a woman who has finally stopped performing smallness for people who did not deserve her full height. She was not what any of them had thought she was. She had simply been waiting for the right moment to stop pretending otherwise.